Thomas-Alexandre Dumas. David de la Pelleterie was a general in revolutionary France and the highest-ranking man of African descent all-time in a European army. He was the first person of color in the French military to become brigadier general, the first to become divisional general, and the first to become general-in-chief of the French army. Dumas shared the status of the highest-ranking officer of sub-Saharan origin in the Western world only with Toussaint Louverture until 1975, when the American Daniel "Chappie" James Jr. became a four-star general in the United States Air Force, the closest American equivalent of General d'Armée QT. Dumas's highest rank. Born in Saint-Domingue, Thomas-Alexandre was of mixed race, the son of a white French nobleman and an enslaved mother of African descent. He was born into slavery because of his mother's status but was also born into nobility because of his father's. His father took the boy with him to France in 1776 and had him educated. Slavery had been illegal in metropolitan France since 1315 and thus any slave would be freed de facto by being in the country. His father helped Thomas-Alexandre enter the French military. Dumas played a pivotal role in the French Revolutionary Wars. Entering the military as a private at age 24, Dumas rose by age 31 to command 53,000 troops as the general-in-chief of the French Army of the Alps. Dumas's strategic victory in opening the High Alps passes enabled the French to initiate their second Italian campaign against the Austrian Empire. During the battles in Italy, Austrian troops nicknamed Dumas as the Schwarzer Teufel. The French, notably Napoleon, nicknamed him the Horatius Cocles of the Tyrol, for single-handedly defeating a squadron of enemy troops at a bridge over the Isaac River in Clausen. Dumas served as commander of the French cavalry forces on the Expedition d'Égypte, a failed French attempt to conquer Egypt and the Levant. On the march from Alexandria to Cairo, he clashed verbally with the expedition's supreme commander Napoleon Bonaparte, under whom he had served in the Italian campaigns. In March 1799, Dumas left Egypt on an unsound vessel, which was forced to put aground in the southern Italian kingdom of Naples, where he was taken prisoner and thrown into a dungeon. He languished there until the spring of 1801. Returning to France after his release, he and his wife had a son, Alexandre Dumas, who became one of France's most widely read authors of all time. The novelist Dumas's most famous characters were inspired by the life of General Dumas. Another grandson, Henry Bauer, who was never recognized by the novelist Dumas, was a prominent left-leaning theatre critic in the same period. The general's great-grandson, Gerard Bauer, son of Henry Bauer, was also an accomplished writer in the 20th century. A great-great-grandson, Alexandre Lippmann, was a two-time gold medalist in fencing at the 1908 and 1924 Olympic Games. Ancestry. Born 25 March 1762 in Jérémie, Saint-Domingue, Thomas-Alexandre David de la Pelleterie was the son of a French nobleman, the Marquis Alexandre Antoine David de la Pelleterie and Marie Cécile Dumas, his black African slave. Father noble pedigree. Alexandre Antoine David de la Pelleterie, born 1714, was the oldest of three sons of the Marquis Alexandre David de la Pelleterie and Jean-Françoise Paultet de Dominon. The David de la Pelleteries were provincial Norman aristocrats whose wealth was in decline. The family had acquired the title of lords by 1632. The French kingdom granted the title, Marquis, to the family by 1708. Alexandre Antoine David de la Pelleterie had two younger brothers, Charles and Edouard born in 1716, and Louis-François Thérèse born in 1718. All three were educated at a military school and pursued careers as officers in the French military. They first served during the War of Polish Succession. Antoine David de la Pelleterie, who reached the rank of colonel, notably saw action at the Siege of Philipsburg in 1734. career in Saint-Domingue. In 1732, Antoine's younger brother Charles had been given a military posting in Saint-Domingue, a French colony in the Caribbean that generated high revenues from its sugarcane plantations, worked by African slave labor. In 1738, Charles left the military to become a sugar planter in that colony. He married Anne-Marie Tuffet, a rich local French Creole widow, and took over her estate. That year Antoine also left the army and joined his brother and his wife in Saint-Domingue. He lived with them and worked at the plantation until 1748. After the two brothers quarreled violently, Antoine left Charles's plantation, taking his 3 personal slaves. At that point Antoine broke off contact with his brother and his family for a period of 30 years. During that time, Antoine Davy de la Pelleterie purchased the slave woman Marie Cesset for an exorbitant price, and took her as a concubine. In 1762, she gave birth to their mixed-race son Thomas-Alexandre. During her time with Antoine, she also had 3 daughters with him. The French colonist made a living in Jérémie, Saint-Domingue as a coffee and cacao planter, under the assumed name of Antoine de Lisle. When the brothers' parents, the Marquise Jean-Françoise and the Marquis Alexandre Davy de la Pelleterie, died in 1757 and 1758, respectively, Charles returned to Normandy to claim the title of Marquis and the family chateau. The British blockade of French shipping during the 7 Years' War reduced Charles's income from sugar exports, so he tried to smuggle the commodity out of Saint-Domingue from his plantation. He used a wharf in the neutral border territory of Monte Cristo. Charles died of gout in 1773. Louis, the youngest of the Davy de la Pelleterie brothers, died 3 months later. He had served a 15-day sentence for being involved in selling defective weapons to the French military. Mother Marie Cesset Dumas, described as a great matriarch to a saga of distinguished men, was a slave and concubine of African descent owned by the Antoine Davy de la Pelleterie. They resided together at her plantation called La Guinaude, near Jérémie until shortly before Antoine's departure in 1775. He sold Marie Cesset Dumas, their other 2 children, and her daughter by another man to a baron from Nantes before leaving Saint-Domingue. The only source for her full name, Marie Cesset Dumas, with that spelling, is General Thomas-Alexandre Dumas's later marriage certificate and contract. Her grandson's memoir gave her name as Louise, and another source recorded Cécile. Sources have spelling variations of her name, as standardization was not common at the time. Some scholars have suggested that Dumas was not a surname for Marie Cesset, but meaning of the farm was added to her first names to signify that she belonged to the property. Others have suggested African origins of the names Cesset and Dumas, including Gabon, Yoruba or Dahomey. The 2 extant primary documents that state a racial identity for Marie Cesset Dumas refer to her as a negressa as opposed to a mulatress. Secondary sources on General Thomas-Alexandre Dumas, dating back to 1822, almost always describe his mother as a black African. Death sources differ on the date and circumstance of her death. 2 documents signed by Alexandre Dumas, his contract and certificate of marriage to Marie-Louise Labouré, state that Marie Cesset died in La Guinaude, near Jérémie, Saint-Domingue, in 1772. Based on this death date, Victor Emmanuel Roberto Wilson speculates that she may have died in the mass outbreak of dysentery following a hurricane that struck principally the Grand Anse region of Saint-Domingue that year. 2 other documents attest that Marie Cesset was alive after 1772. A letter recounting her sale in 1775 and an 1801 document signed by Dumas, saying that Marie Cesset will be in charge of General Dumas's properties in Saint-Domingue. Thomas-Alexandre Dumas may have earlier claimed that she had died in order to avoid having to get her approval before marriage and revealing her slave status. In addition, he was in a hurry to leave for the military front. Names Dumas used several names in his life: Thomas-Alexandre David de la Pelleterie, Thomas Rethore, Alexandre Dumas, Alex Dumas, and finally Thomas-Alexandre Dumas David de la Pelleterie. David de la Pelleterie is his father's family name. He used the name Rethore during and for some years after the period in which his father sold him and then repurchased him. According to the biographer Tom Rees, the name Rethore was perhaps picked up from a neighbor in Jérémie. The name Dumas is from his mother. He used the simple form Alex Dumas starting in 1794. General Dumas used the full name Thomas-Alexandre Dumas David de la Pelleterie on his son's birth certificate appearance. The enlistment roll book for the 6th Regiment of the Queen's Dragoons, which Dumas joined in 1786, described him as 6 feet tall, with frizzy black hair and eyebrows, oval face, and brown-skinned, small mouth, thick lips. According to the earliest known published description of him, he was one of the handsomest men you could ever meet. His frizzy hair recalls the curls of the Greeks and Romans. It described his face as something closer to ebony than to bronze elsewhere. General Dumas has been described as dark, very dark. Early life. Thomas-Alexandre had 2 siblings by his parents, Adolphe and Jeanette. They also had an older half-sister, Marie-Rose, born to Marie Cesset before David de la Pelleterie purchased her and began their relationship. His father sold Marie Cesset and her other 3 children before arranging to take Thomas-Alexandre with him to France. In 1776, when Alexandre was 14 years old, his father sold the boy for 800 French livres in Port-au-Prince, officially to a Lieutenant Jacques-Louis Roussel. This sale provided both a legal way to have Alexander taken to France with Langlois and a temporary loan to pay for his father's passage. The boy accompanied Captain Langlois to Le Havre, France, arriving on August 30, 1776, where his father brought him back and freed him. From his arrival in France until autumn 1778, Alexandre first lived with his father at the David de la Pelleterie family estate in Belleville-en-Corx, Normandy. After his father sold that estate in 1777, they moved to a townhouse on the Rue de la Goutte in the Parisian suburb of Saint-Germain-en-Laye. There, Alexander studied at the Academy of Nicolas Texier de la Boétie, where he was given the higher education of a young nobleman of the time. At this school, he learned swordsmanship from the Chevalier de Saint-Georges, another mixed-race man from the French Caribbean. Flush with cash from the sale of his family estate, David de la Pelleterie for many years spent lavishly on Dumas. His notary said that the boy cost him enormously, from 1777 to 1786, from age 15 to 24, thanks to his father's wealth and generosity. Dumas lived a life of considerable leisure. In 1784, at age 22, Alexander moved to an apartment on Rue Etienne, near the Louvre Palace in Paris, socializing at venues such as the Palais Royal and Nicolas Theatre. In September 1784, while seated at Nicolas Theatre in the company of a beautiful Creole woman, he and his companion were harassed by a white colonial naval officer, Jean-Pierre Titon de Saint-Lamaine, and 1 or 2 others. Following Dumas's verbal protests, the men tried to force him to kneel before his attacker and beg for his freedom. The police report on the incident shows that Titon chose not to press charges as he might have, and all participants were released.